Study once, remember forever. Almost every study video on YouTube makes some version of this promise. And I hate these videos, partly because they're a bit condescending, but mostly they miss the most important fact about how our brains work. And that's that our brains are really good at forgetting information. It's inevitable. You're going to forget, I'm going to forget, your friend's going to forget. It happens. The good news, however, is that in my experience coaching students and professionals, most people forget way more than they need to. And that's what traps them in that cycle of having to learn something once and forget it and then relearn it. It's just a really big waste of time. I'm going to show you 6 techniques though, 6 techniques that you can use in your very first learning session or exposure to a topic. And on their own, each of them helps a little bit, but if you use all 6 together, they can help you remember a lot more information in the same amount of time that you're already spending when it comes to your learning. I'm going to get the trusty old iPad out. I'm going to demonstrate it on a real topic so you can see how these 6 techniques stack on top of one another. The first 3 techniques are about one thing: the depth of your thinking. Research on cognitive psychology demonstrates that you remember things that you think hard about. So these first 3 techniques are designed to force that higher order thinking, that deeper, harder thinking. And that's actually what makes information stickier in the first place. Most people are not really thinking that hard when it comes to their note taking or learning, which is what makes it really easy for your brain to forget. So what we'll do is we're going to walk you through the 3 techniques first, after one another, go through the theory, and then demonstrate it on a real topic, get out the trusty iPad to show how all 3 of these interconnect. The first technique is the importance ranking technique. As you go through the new material, you want to rate how important each concept is on a scale of 1 to 5. This is one of the very first techniques that I teach anyone I work with who wants to start processing information a bit more deeply. And the key here, the big change, is that you have to start guessing and just being comfortable with giving yourself a rating and just moving forward with it. You don't need the perfect answer. You don't need to do, is it a 4.5? You don't need decimal points. You just need to force yourself to decide and understand like which concept would be the most important. And you just take a guess. And it's that act of judging the importance that forces that level of scrutiny over passive note taking. The second technique is relational mapping. Once you've actually done this importance ranking, and again, we'll demonstrate it, you'll now start thinking about the concepts in relation to one another. You'll think about causality. You'll think about how these ideas relate. And so we can take it further by connecting them within our notes. Again, depending on your note-taking medium, you want to draw links between ideas, which is why I recommend having a paper and pen or a stylus and iPad. We'll demonstrate that a bit later. And you can show how one of the concepts or more of the concepts all relate with one another. You then create this web, you organize it, and this is actually reflective of how your brain stores information. It's called schema theory. It's all these maps that are stored in your brain. The third and final technique of this first section is micro teaching. As you go through your notes and as you are learning this new topic, every few minutes, whether that's 5 or 10 minutes, you actually want to stop and go to a new part, flip a new page, and teach everything that you've just learned to an imaginary student. The reason this helps is because, again, retrieval practice has huge benefits. We're talking about a few days or weeks after initially learning the content, but doing this at a micro scale, a few minutes or even within the same session itself can reproduce and replicate those benefits that we get from retrieval practice. And it also instantly exposes you to gaps of the content that you've just taken notes on, because again, your brain is really good at forgetting information, and so might just forget. And so using this a bit earlier in the process is what gives us the opportunity to surface these gaps a lot sooner, as opposed to waiting like 3 weeks to find that we have a gap and then spend that time just filling it in. So let's do this. We've gone through the 3 techniques. We're going to get the iPad out and demonstrate it on a real topic. Let's do our demonstration of the 3 techniques in question. The first one here is the importance ranking. Second one is relational mapping. And third one is not abstract visuals. I miswrote that. That is going to be micro teaching. Let's correct that one there. There we go. Okay, so We've got a topic on the left-hand side, which is health psychology. I need to study this for university, so I thought may as well make a video of me studying the things that I need to study anyway. You know, two birds with one stone. And we're going to do the first technique, and then we'll demonstrate how it actually links with technique 2 and technique 3 that has been listed here. The first one is importance ranking, and this one is actually not that hard. As we are going to be reading through the PDF here, or the resource, we're just going to take a look at the concepts, and we're just going to identify how important is that on a scale of 1 to 5. Easy. So, take a look at health psychology. That's the first concept that already comes through. How important is that on a scale of 1 to 5? I'm going to guess, I don't know, maybe a 4 out of 5. I mean, that's what the topic is called. So what I'll quickly do is I'm just going to collect my keywords as I'm doing this. So health psychology, I feel like that's probably going to be a 4 because it's like, well, I mean, it's going to be the most overarching, most important definition of the topic. I mean, it's a topic by nature. I could see there could be like different components and sub-concepts, but I don't see it being as important as health psychology. So maybe 4 out of 5 is what I'll do. But let's read through. Let's just see what the other things are here. Definition, mind-body relationship, rise of the biopsychosocial model as well. There's quite a few things here. Let's just go. Health psychology. Nice. So that's the definition. It's a new field, and it's devoted to understanding like mental stuff and how the mental stuff affects how like happy and healthy people feel, why they become sick because of the mental stuff, and how they respond to the sickness that they have. Interventions as well. Nice. So when I think about this, I think about like preventative psychology. I think about preventative health, which is what I personally like to also engage in as well. So that's pretty cool. I think that's like a 4 out of 5 out of importance. All right. So let's go to like another thing. Okay. Health seems to be like the next keyword that's pointed out here, health. And based on what health is, there's a quick definition there. I don't know. This is not that important. I mean, it's important, but it's like maybe like a 3 out of 5. I could see it being important, but not as important as health psychology. That's definitely way more important. Wellness here, how important is that as a topic? I mean, they just defined wellness as like a balance between physical, mental, and social well-being. Wellness is a keyword. Maybe that is actually quite important because, I mean, all illness is talked about in the context of like not being like anything that is not wellness is illness. Maybe that's a 5 out of 5 definition, actually. That's a really important definition. I'd argue it's more important than health psychology as a definition. Maybe. But I could also see what's not that relevant. Well, I don't know. I would say it's a 4 out of 5. Why not? Yeah, let's keep going. Etiology refers to the origins or causes. Okay, yeah, that's quite important. The causes, the origins of illness. I actually feel like etiology. I also feel like that's like a 5 out of 5. That's actually really important. I don't see it being as important as like health psychology. Maybe I'll bump that down to a 3 out of 5 because I feel like once you've defined what health is, and then you've defined what good health looks like, then you identify like what the causes of bad health is. I just feel like 3 and 4 are just way more pertinent for this type of topic. But let's keep going anyway. I'll just skip that. That's okay. There's quite a few things here. Biomedical. Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with this. There's quite a few, and I can go through these things. So, for example, biomedical model, how important do I think that is? I definitely don't think it's as important as the other topics. I'm actually going to give it probably like I'm leaning on like a 1. Maybe like a 1 out of 5. It's a cool history. It's cool to know, but in terms of how important it is, actually, I might just give it a 2. So that's a biomedical model. I would just say it's 2. Yeah, I don't really see it being that important. Conversion hysteria, unconscious conflicts can produce physical disturbances. I see that maybe to. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna change this to 1 out of 5, and then conversion hysteria. I don't really know what that is, but it kind of seems like Freud just figured out if you have like mental stuff that's going on that's unconscious, it can affect you. That's like a 2 out of 5 because this is like shows like a gradually evolving thing. Psychosomatic medicine. What even is that? I actually don't think that's really important. Psychosomatic medicine. I'm not gonna write. I'm just gonna write psychosomatic med. Yeah. I don't know. That kind of feels like a 1 out of 5 because it's like why does medicine even matter that much? Biopsychosocial model. This is the fundamental model. Ooh. In that situation, I might have to put that at like a 4 out of 5 because that kind of seems like, I'm trying to think about how the biopsychosocial model. Like, I do feel like that's a 4 out of 5. Just taking a look at the other rankings here, health psychology, I think it's still at a 3 out of 5. Health psychology and health. Ooh, maybe that's a 4. I'll actually upgrade that a little bit more. And then biopsychosocial model. Is it as important as wellness and etiology? I do think it is because it's like the crux of modern day psychology and health psychology. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just going to do a little bit more, but I'm going back and forth. I'm changing my ratings. It's making me think about the topics. You can already see I've unconsciously done the second technique here, which is relational mapping. I'm not going to do it yet. Something else I want to comment on is you can see I'm comfortable with just going through and skipping parts, and that's okay. This is a strategy in which we control the order of where we want to go, because again, if my brain wants to learn about this, just go. I don't need to follow the author's order necessarily on my first pass of the content. I can do that later. Once I've done like a brief skim of everything, that's when I can just then read in order and just kind of give myself that. But I'll just do it for 2 more topics just to try seeing if there's any other different way of thinking about the topic. This does seem very interesting, by the way. Acute disorders, short-term illnesses. Again, how important is that? You can see, like, the author's going to convince me an important factor influencing the rise of health psychology has been the change in illness patterns. That could be the case. That genuinely could be the case. And so maybe when I actually read that, acute disorders for me is like a 2 out of 5. But then when I read this, it's like, no, it's actually more important than I initially thought. That's okay. I might then change it. So the pattern of diseases actually helped us give insight on the importance of health psychology. In that situation, I would actually have to, yeah, like if we just take a look here, the amount of diseases people are getting is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy change compared to the 20th century and the 21st century. It's weird. Interesting. Okay. So chronic illnesses, and there's also acute illnesses. I'd have to learn a little bit more about the official definition of it, but I don't think they're equally as important. I actually feel like I feel like I feel like one of the other influences health psychology a lot more. So it seems like here acute disorders, short-term illnesses might be influencing a little bit more. Is there any evidence? This is where I'd pause a little bit and stop speaking. So give me a few seconds. This is my guess based on what is happening right now. I would have to spend a bit more time evaluating it. I would like to argue that the acute disorders show more of an influence than chronic illness on health psychology. So I'm going to put that as like a I'm going to put acute as a 4 out of 5, then chronic illness as a 3 out of 5. But do I think chronic illness is more important than health psychology as a definition? The last point that I want to mention before I get into relational mapping is you can see that we are doing it on a scale of 1 to 5. I do recommend a scale of 1 to 5 when starting. Don't change this to a 1 to 10 yet. Change it to a 1 to 10 when you are getting into a bit more of the details. I also mentioned that you shouldn't be using decimal rankings too soon, so try forcing yourself to operate at that 1 to 5 level towards the earlier part of a learning session, and then you can change that scale to a 1 to 10 the more deep you go, because technically I could actually differentiate between health psychology and acute illness. I would argue health psychology as a definition is not as important as understanding the mechanism of acute illness and how that actually led to the rise of health psychology in the first place. So this is a nice way to then now go into our second process, our second technique, which is relational mapping. Let's get another color to demonstrate that. So you can see from that importance ranking technique that we've done, like, again, I'd do this for the whole topic. I'd actually sit down and just look at all the keywords and do the ranking, and I'd read and I'd comprehend. Obviously, because I'm making a video on teaching how it is, I'm not going to be able to do that here. Otherwise, it'd just be me sitting for like an hour, just quiet, thinking, looking out the window, smashing my head on the table, and trying to figure out which is the most important topic or concept. But relational mapping now is when you start relating these ideas together. So if you're using a piece of paper, this is actually when you want to start using more arrows, less sentences. You can see what I've done here is I've just done the keyword and I've just done the rating, and that mental narrative of like me justifying its rating, etc. I was doing that by saying sentences that implied relations, right? That implied relational thinking. What do I mean? Remember how I just said that the reason I feel like chronic illness is still more important than health psychology? It's because our understanding of the trends of chronic illnesses is actually what led us to think about health psychology a lot more in the first place. And that was like a relationship that was made quite clear here. You can see it's a relatively new field, right? And then we talk about down here why it actually came to place here, right? So there you go. So that's what I would actually say. Now, what I would like to mention is that if we actually go to chronic illness, there you go. I've already got that relation. So now we're going to start that relational thinking process where we start relating the concepts a little bit more. So health psychology, the way that it's defined, it is literally just defined as like it aims to define what health is, what wellness is, preventing it, and then etiology. Like I just feel like those are the major relationships that exist there. So if we think about health psychology, which is the topic's name, it's actually not the most important topic in my opinion. I feel like the most important collection of ideas was the definition of wellness and how like wellness eventually leads into illness, and illness is, and like the cause of illness is explored by etiology, which is what I understood. And this is literally, well, when illness happens, I guess that kind of causes us to explore etiology a little bit. And then etiology is what actually leads into like understanding of treatment and like medicine and like care that is required. Like that's what I understood. This is at the end of the day what health psychology is. Obviously there's the mental aspect, which is what health psychology tries. It's like preventative and mental, which is what it tries to talk about. So yeah, I feel like when you get preventative and then when you get mental, when you talk about the mental influences, that's how you then get health psychology. That's actually what led to the understanding of health psychology. So that order is really important for me to understand. Now, I'll walk you through what's happening here. As I'm doing this relational thinking, I'm also identifying that there are certain topics and certain keywords that are more important than one another, and that comes from this importance ranking technique. You can see I've deliberately prioritized keywords like health, like wellness, like etiology over health psychology, because health psychology is like, it's like an outcome of all of these keywords. Therefore, I am not falling into the trap of being like, oh, the topic's name is health psychology, therefore it must be the most important. No, no, no. There's like a layer of depth that is being done here. And that's how I'm like implicitly just creating these relationships and these ways of thinking right now. And that's why I've kind of, represented the information that I have. And then I would say that there's also like a history that's going on here as well. There's like an old definition of health psychology and what it meant to be healthy. And that's when we're talking about the biomedical model. There's Freud. There's also some religious definitions of it here as well, back in the 1600s and whatnot. And there's also the kind of more modern, new way of thinking about it. And you can see I'm kind of relating that together. I would say that this understanding of health psychology is new, and so I'd then connect new here somehow, and I have like all the details as to why it's old and new and the different ways of thinking about it and whatnot. And there's also like acute illnesses that kind of like relates to new. Our understanding of the trend of chronic and acute illnesses kind of goes there as well. So this is the process of me actually connecting all the information together. This is what relational mapping is. I'm really trying to put it there. And a common question that a lot of learners have is, well, like, this map has no detail. That is so wrong. You can, like, I'm just going to literally just show you what this means. This bit of, like, these keywords and these relationships have so much going on. I was narrating my exact thought process, but as I just did, I could just go for it again. Health psychology, it's a new field. I don't have the word new here, but it implies it through. Oh, I do have the word new here, but I already understand it because I've been thinking about it a little bit more, right? So, wellness and health is defined in a certain way, and that's broadly defined as three major factors: physical, mental, and social. And when these are in balance, we have wellness, and that's what wellness is defined as. And the World Health Organization has defined health as well as good, as like having a balance between those two. So I'm going to have to figure out exactly how those differentiate. But then illness is when one of these things has an imbalance, whether that's the physical, whether that's the mental, whether that's the social. And for a very long time, the world has only really considered the physical. If you're feeling bad, it can only really be physical, and therefore the remedies can only really be physical. And so you take a look at the early days of medicine, the 1600s, people would only really be thinking about, well, what can we see? Cool. Like, oh, you're sick, take this medicine. Okay, cool, this is the cause. It was very behaviorist in that sense. It was very observational. But then as time evolved, we started to, the cognitive revolution, I guess you could say, there was an appreciation for the fact that illness goes beyond just, like physical things. There's also mental things. Freud was one of the very first people that actually started to propose this idea of, well, there could be like these unconscious thoughts that you have that then cause certain issues. And this is where we started thinking about psychology a bit more. There's the biopsychosocial model that eventually evolved from the biomedical model to the biopsychosocial model, which is more holistic and reflective of how healthcare professionals and professionals in psychology actually go without their treatment, go with their treatment. So there's so much information that's already in this map as I'm micro teaching it, by the way. And this actually leads into our final step before we move on to the next three techniques. What I'm going to do every now and then is I want to then move to like a new part. So when I spend time mapping this out and reading through the actual topic, I'm then going to again, if you're using a timer, I usually recommend people to use a timer. Every 15 or 20 minutes, if you've got like a learning session that goes for like an hour or two, you'll end up doing micro teaching at least 3 times in that session. That's what I recommend as a ballpark. If you've got an hour session, I always recommend at least 2 times. And what this practically means is you just go, like, you might just be doing this and you just quickly go back to like a new part, a fresh part of your canvas, of piece of paper, whatever it is, and you just teach. You just teach exactly what you've learned. You don't take a look at the content. So what I'd practically do is I'd just like open up a new tab so I'm not cheating. And I'll do that process what I was doing. Now, I'm kind of cheating because I just taught it right then, but I'll try kind of going through my chain of thinking again. Why not? So what we would do is we would then talk about, okay, cool. All right, so we had a few concepts there. Now, one of the most important things when it comes to taking care of ourselves and going to the doctors and going to the psychologist is the fact that we want to feel good. But what does it mean to feel good? There's actually a very formal definition. There are three factors we think about. We think about the biological factor. How is our body functioning? But not only that, we think about our brains, our minds. How is our mental health? How is our focus? How is our concentration? How are our thoughts? And finally, we also think about the relationships that we have with other people. And it's actually these three factors that then bring about the concept of wellness. And wellness is defined as having good biological, good mental, also physical, whatever you want to call it, good mental and good social circumstances, and having these in balance and harmony. Anytime that this is not in balance, we get illness. And this is the biggest thing about health. Like, we want to get rid of illness. And essentially, when it comes to getting rid of illness, we need to then think about, where does this illness come from? Like, what causes illness? And that's what etiology is, and that's what, like, the crux of research and, healthcare is. Like, we try figuring out what the problems are. And that then finally leads us into thinking about the treatment that you can get, the care that you deserve, whatnot. So that's the trend of, how we were thinking. But we didn't just get here out of nowhere. One of the big ways that we got here is by comparing where we were classically, so the old way of thinking, compared to where we are right now. And so there was actually an old way of thinking, and there's now a new way of thinking. The old way of thinking, so we're talking about 20th century, we're talking about early 16, so it's like 1600s to the 1900s. We had a way of thinking that was purely just like physical, like if you had an illness, if you had a clear problem with you, if we could see it, then we would then consider that you have a problem. And so we actually had the biomedical model, which was just that physical, just the observable things that you have, and taking medicine and doing all these like herbs and whatnot, right? That was like what happened in the past. But then eventually there was some really smart people that was like, hang on, there's also mental stuff that happens. There's also like unconscious things that we do. There's illnesses of the mind as well. All right. Health is not just your body, it's also your mind. And we had like really smart people like Freud, well, again, debatable, right? Piaget, right? We had, we just had some really, really smart people who were just like, let's consider things that go beyond just the conscious things or the observable things that we can see. And this obviously kind of like caused the cognitive revolution, and that then led us to eventually where we are right now, where we are seeing that there's a greater appreciation for mental health. There's also like a change in the diseases that we have as a society, so the chronic and acute diseases that we have as well. And we're starting to appreciate the causes and the etiology of these diseases too. So there's like a difference there as well. Like some people, and there's also like a question, why do some people get less sick? Why are married men, why do they live longer than unmarried men? There's so many factors that we need to start identifying, and all of these questions then led to the idea and the field of health psychology being developed, which is essentially what this topic is. It's not a major idea, but it's more so an outcome of this revolution that we've experienced. So very much how the cognitive revolution exists for other topics in psychology, like health psychology is one of those revolutions where people are thinking about two things. There are two major factors from what I understand. One of the first factors was the fact that it's preventative. We're thinking more about how we can prevent stuff. But number two, there's also a greater appreciation for the mental aspect of it, and how people actually respond mentally and cope and whatnot, and how that actually influences one's well-being and wellness, which is health, and psychology is just the mental part of it. So that's a very broad, really quick way of just micro-teaching. Again, I didn't even give myself the big opportunity, like the biggest opportunity to explore everything here. But there were some parts of the notes that I really wanted to flesh out a little bit more. But you can see here, I definitely have forgotten some things. So if we just take a look at this list here, I mean, I got everything here. I mean, that wasn't really that detailed. So let's just go back to that list though. So the conversion. I forgot what this was. My handwriting sucks. There was something that Freud mentioned about this that I forgot entirely about. Right, you can already see there's some forgetting going on. Our brains are excellent at forgetting. There was the psychosomatic medicine. Admittedly, I didn't really touch on that enough and give myself the opportunity. So, of course, I wouldn't have remembered that. But you can see I've ranked it as not that important, not that important. Biomedical model, I actually remembered a bit more because I connected it with the biosocial model, biopsychosocial model. Yeah. And then chronic illness and acute illness, I defined a little bit, but I don't fully know them yet. But there was a good amount that I feel like I remembered in that sense. But this is where I'd then move on. I would then move on. I'd take this map. I'd then go back to step one, importance ranking. I'd then expose myself to all the material here and trying to actually identify. So conversion hysteria. Okay, there we go. That's what it was. Yeah, of course I didn't remember that. But now I'd spend a bit more time just reading through it and going through it. So you can see these three techniques. Again, really quick demonstration of what it is. Realistically, this would last a couple of hours. This demonstrates how we can slowly start to think about the concepts a bit deeper and make it a bit more sticky. The next three techniques that we're about to go through is how we can then take this and make it even more memorable. Those first three techniques were about thinking harder. The next three techniques are a bit different. These are memory aids. The technique's whole job is to make the information easier to remember by doing some crazy stuff to it, by making it a bit more relevant. We'll show what that is. It's less about the actual depth and the understanding, and it's more about just let me memorize, let me retain this, right? It's the same approach as before. We're going to walk through each three of the techniques, how to actually do them, and then go onto the iPad and demonstrate them on the topic that we just did the first three techniques on. So, technique 4 out of the 6 is analogies. When there's a new idea or new concepts, and again, we just related a bunch of information together, we want to think about what's like an intuitive analogy that represents this. This does a few powerful things. Number one, you have to like reach into what you already kind of know. Like you have to find ways of thinking that you have, something that's already intuitive to you, prior knowledge that already exists in your brain, and then you need to try fitting it there. The second thing, and this is the more underrated part, you then have to judge if your analogy is good, right? Like, does your analogy work? Does it break, right? Like, are there parts that are just not really reflective of the content itself? And it's that process of reiteration that really leads to analogies being quite strong for retention. The fifth technique is going to be abstract visuals. This is where you have a little bit more fun. The ideas that you've just mapped out and you thought about, you can think about pictures, absurd pictures. And if they're weird and more ridiculous, it's actually better because your brain remembers those strange things a lot easier than like more normal things. And so, like a boring fact, you don't want to just draw like a really scientific diagram or very, very specific diagram. Draw something funny, fun, crazy, right? And that's what makes it a bit more memorable, just those unhinged, weird ways of thinking about the facts that you are learning. The sixth technique, and this is the final technique, is mnemonics. So quite similar to the abstract visuals. You then turn all these ideas and these ways of thinking into a phrase, an acronym, a word. And again, it's like that weird word that you might think of, or it doesn't have to necessarily be weird. It can just be like a really quick shortcut. It can just be a list or a word that demonstrates the steps of a certain process, right? And they help you recall things, right? As we just mentioned, mnemonics. But again, you need to know the depth of the actual topic. You need to know the topics, which is what the first three techniques do. So those were the remaining three techniques. That was for remembering things and memorizing things. We just talked about analogies, abstract visuals, and mnemonics. So let's get out the trusty iPad and let's demonstrate what these three techniques look like in action. Now coming to the next three techniques and the demonstration of these. it's going to be 4, which is analogies, 5, which is abstract visuals, and then 6, which is mnemonics. So if we just take a look at this map that I've created, even though, yes, I was able to teach it again, and I was able to just comprehend it a little bit more, I feel like I don't really feel that confident. I feel like I am going to forget it. Like if you give me a couple of hours, I would retain it, but like in like 2-3 days time, I probably forget it if it's in its current state. And so what I want to do is I don't want to let this depth of thinking just erase and just go away. I want to solidify it through these memory aids: analogies, abstract visuals, and mnemonics. So if we take a look at this flow here, what's like an analogy that works for me? I'm going to try thinking about an analogy in terms of like, we've got wellness, we've got illness, we've got etiology, and then we've got like the diagnosis. A common one that I use, I might be cheating here a little bit because I kind of think about it like quite a few times. Maybe we can think about it like a car. So what used to happen is like, okay, so you might have like performance. Oh, not performance, like function, good function. Like the good functioning of a car is so many things. You got to make sure that the engine is working well. You got to make sure that the fuel is there too, and you got to make sure that like the tires and the chassis, there's no problems with that. So that's like what it means for a car to be working well, right? But sometimes what can happen is that the car can eventually malfunction. I didn't like the word malfunction. Maybe there's like a better word here. The car can start to break down. Dysfunction. A bit easier for me to remember, just like an antonym. So the car just starts to dysfunction. And what actually ends up happening is then we have to diagnose what the issue is. And then that then leads into a solution. Like, do we need to change the engine? Was there like a problem with one of the fuel injectors or whatnot? So that's like an analogy for health psychology, the way that I see it. The way that I see it is that if we had to just try explaining this analogy, the way that health psychology came about was just imagine that we all made like a bunch of cars, and there was the engine, and there was like a chassis, there was tires, there was the glass, there was everything. What used to happen in the past was people would just take a look at the outside and be like, oh well, this car's the wheel was popped, and the engine, not the engine, sorry, the wheel is popped, and the engine's making really weird noises. It's like fueling, like it's leaking engine oil, whatever. The glasses are like shattered. The chassis is like broken, and whatever, like suspension's not working, and so there's a lot of observable things that would go wrong, and we'd only fix the issues once your car is kind of destroyed. But what happened over time was that people started appreciating, hang on, there could actually be issues inside of the engine and inside of the car that we can't see necessarily. But these are definitely really, really big issues. And so that reflects like the mental aspect. So I feel like in the past, if there was a car, they'd only really care about what they can see about the car, what's observable. But then as time passed, they realized that there could be invisible things that are happening in the engine that don't necessarily make like a really big noise or show like an immediate problem. But over time, that can actually lead into something like really bad. And so that's when they had to like kind of create more, how you got the dashboard of a car and you've got like indicators. And so I feel like what health psychology is kind of like the warning lights that you get when you're driving your car. And health psychology is kind of like, the fact that you aren't waiting until you get into an accident for your car, but you're constantly going to a service or a repair even well before an accident, even if an accident doesn't occur every couple of months, just to check on how your car is going, just to get that maintenance check, just to service your car to make sure that everything is good. I feel like that analogy works a little bit, like as a human, instead of thinking about it as humans, I feel like the car analogy kind of works. Nice. I like that a little bit. Yeah. Maybe that makes a little bit more sense. Huh. Yeah. Okay. I could see that analogy working. And so what I might do is I might actually like draw out that analogy a little bit more. And so we might think about solutions, and then, initially we would start, yeah, then like, in the old days, and then we got the new days. We would really take a look at what would happen outside of the car, but now in the new days, we're focusing on the engine a bit more. We're focusing on the more invisible problems. We're using we're like having metrics on the dashboard. I actually like that analogy a lot. Like the fact that in modern day cars, you can like see the issues a lot sooner. There's like metrics in place for that. I feel like that's a bit more reflective of potentially like in health psychology, teaching individuals about ways to gauge their levels of mental health, whatnot. Maybe that works, like dashboard lights. I don't know. I feel like that's a nice correlation, maybe. Yeah. And the old part, you really take a look at the like the external. The new parts, you're taking a look at the internal. Nice. So let's try drawing this analogy a little bit more. Like, how does it relate to the idea of like acute illnesses and over time and chronic illnesses? I don't know, actually. Maybe. Oh, maybe like. Ooh, this is nice. So you know how like cars back in the day, they didn't really have like a lot of safety features, but nowadays they do. I feel like it also reflects the access to healthcare that we all have as individuals. There's something mentioned here as well. So basically nowadays, a lot of the one could argue a lot of chronic illnesses, acute illnesses, unfortunately is caused by largely like mental health, like a lot of people making poor decisions, overdosing, taking like lots of drugs, suicide, self-harm, like inflicting harm amongst themselves, bad habits. So if you take a look at the shift in the types of illnesses that people are getting back in the 1600s, 1900s, etc., people will be getting illnesses because they were genuinely sick, like flus and like all these like Spanish flu and like chicken pox, whatever, like all those kind of diseases that they would get. Uh, yeah, like smallpox, and there was no vaccines and whatnot. And so back then, because cars were also like quite fragile and old and didn't have access to what we have today, a lot more of those health issues were like causing premature deaths, and they were caused by like genuinely not being protected by the environment, and really largely outside of the control of a lot of people. But it seems like nowadays, because we've got more access to healthcare, and we've got vaccines and more access to just medicine, like fundamentally we are just more like a bit stronger in that sense, where we have more protection and we have more ways of curing ourselves. And if I had to kind of draw it back to the car analogy, it's like back in the day we'd have like an old car, it wouldn't be working. Nowadays we've got cars that are stronger, tires that are stronger, chassis that are stronger. We've got more people who are able to fix those cars. We've got quicker response times for fixing those cars. We've got people who can tow you back in case your car breaks. And largely this is reflective of just the advancement of technology, etc. But nowadays, people that are getting into car accidents, maybe there's different ways those car accidents are being caused. Maybe because, nowadays, because we have access to so much processed food or even drugs or whatnot, a lot of these are being caused by those types of issues, like self-inflicted harm. Maybe there's different types of harm that we have nowadays. Like, even though, yes, the cars are safer nowadays, just because there's more cars on the road, maybe people are just crashing into one another a bit more. So I don't know if health psychology talks something about like murder or whatnot. I don't know, just because there's more people and more cars, there's just a greater likelihood of accidents. There's different ways that a car might malfunction nowadays because it's just fundamentally different. And I feel like health psychology talks a little bit about that as well. So I'm really trying to draw this analogy to many things. Yeah, and then health psychology came by because, like, we're fundamentally different. The cars are different nowadays, and so because the cars are different nowadays, there has to be a different way of fixing them and diagnosing issues and communicating them. And fundamentally, because we want to make sure that there's more safety, sure, we could work on buffing up the car a bit more, but now we're starting to think about roads, right? We're starting to think about the infrastructure that surround the car. So this might be like through training, like people about mental health and whatnot, things that go beyond the immediate car that we didn't really think about when cars first came out, right? Maybe the roads are really bad. So yeah, that's my attempt of trying to build an analogy, and that analogy is a way more sticky than the idea of health psychology and the specific parts of it. You can see I even started to dive into the specifics of that car analogy. I started talking about like the dashboard warning lights, which is more reflective of like a preventative way of thinking about health. I talked about some of the differences between old cars and new cars that I then like tried drawing parallels between the state of health psychology at the moment. There's some parts I'm not very happy with, like health psychology has like a very specific definition. There's also psychosomatic medicine that I didn't really dive into as much as well and draw conclusions about. Again, like a car and a human are fundamentally different. There's also the social aspect as well that I didn't really touch on. That analogy is really hard to talk about in a social context too. Like, I mean, cars, they don't really speak to one another. Humans do. So you can see there's weaknesses in this analogy too that I'm thinking about as well. And that's the point. Like, I want to think about the gaps as well. And what I fundamentally what I might do here is I might just draw out that analogy a little bit more. But me just thinking about that analogy, that's a lot more sticky. So I could just not study this topic for a few weeks, but that car analogy does make it a lot easier to kind of remember what I was thinking about. Yeah, and my chain of thinking. So that's that process there of the analogy thinking. And again, it gets getting used to. Try doing the technique for yourself and try creating those parallels between your analogy and the topic itself as you are mapping it out and as you're adding substance onto it. So let's move on to the fifth technique and let's demonstrate this, the abstract visual. This is my favorite part. As we're doing this, we might think about like a keyword that we stumble on, which is a bit hard to remember. For me, like psychosomatic, I'm not entirely familiar with what that is. And what I might try doing is I might try understanding exactly what that is. So psychosomatic or even, psychosomatic. Somatic. There we go. I don't know what this is. Gave rise to the field of psychosomatic medicine. Okay, let's take a look. Specific illnesses produced by internal conflicts. Yeah. Also prone personality, and someone with. Okay, so this. Okay, I see what this is now. All right, and then what did they say? Okay. Disorders are caused by emotional conflicts. Okay, I see. That's what they mean. Mind and body. Nice. That's a really nice differentiation. So I'll just quickly Googled it. Mind body describes physical symptoms, illnesses, or physiological dysfunctions that are caused by psychological. Okay. Psycho. Yeah. Okay. That makes a bit more sense actually. Yeah. And these disorders include ulcers, hyperthyroidism, rheumatoid arthritis, essential hypertension, neurodermatitis, skin disorder, colitis, and bronchial asthma. Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try doing an abstract visual for something like psychosomatic medicine. Maybe it's hard for me to remember, but what I want to do is I want to try thinking about like a really weird visual that I feel like could easily help me remember it. And I already thought of one. So psychosomatic medicine, it seems like the people that started working on it, Dunbar and Alexander, they talked about it first in the concept of like, okay, this is going to be really weird abstract visual. I'm trying to make it PG. Okay, let's go. All right. Don't worry, it's PG. So if we think about psychosomatic medicine, so something that they talked about was ulcers, and ulcers being like a manifestation of a lack of love, right? There was a stomach acids, whatnot. There was something else that they mentioned. Unfortunately, I get really bad ulcers. And I get these on my lips. And so what I might do is I might draw like lips. Not that. That's not a very good drawing. Let me try. And I'm trying to draw mouth ulcers because I get mouth. I actually have one right now. I get mouth ulcers all the time. So let me see. I'm really trying to draw this. Okay. And it's okay if you don't, if you're not good at drawing, because I'm not either. All right, there we go. And then I might just draw the teeth. I'm just drawing the teeth. And here's like a ulcer, right? Yeah, that's really abstract, but the way that I might do it, again, I tried making this PG, is that like a lack of love. So I don't know if there's like if you're like a person and you really need love and you love hugs and kisses and you know someone doesn't give you enough hugs and kisses, you develop mouth ulcers. So maybe there's like a heartbreak emoji here. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, I don't know. That kind of makes sense to me a little bit, maybe. So you can see abstract visual, like mouth ulcer, heartbreak. All right, I'm just going to keep it at there, really. And psychosomatic medicine, essentially, if I had to kind of explain it now that I've got that in my map somewhere, it's like, yeah, I mean, I have tons of mouth ulcers, and I can imagine other people have it as well. And so, you know, like if there's a person that doesn't get enough love, hugs, and kisses, they will eventually then develop a mouth ulcer and an ulcer. And psychosomatic medicine is a way to take, like, you know, a medicine that doesn't get you to do that. But there's another part that I forgot to do. Repressed emotions from frustrated dependency and love-seeking needs were thought to increase the secretion of acid in the stomach. And, oh, okay, so I didn't actually do the stomach part, so let me just do that. Abstract visual. Okay. Stomach. This is gonna be so weird. All right, you know how the stomach is like a shape of like a bag or something? Maybe there's like a plastic bag. Maybe there's like a plastic bag that just loves kisses, and his other plastic bag friend was recycled and died, and so therefore he is now very sad. Like, yeah, let's just draw the recycling symbol. So therefore he is very sad. And that's why Mrs. Plastic Bag is heartbroken, and now she has developed mouth ulcers. Okay, there you go. So now, really abstract visual, very abstract indeed. So psychosomatic medicine, now that I think about it, I would think about like a plastic bag couple. You know, they were in love, and then Mr. Plastic Bag got recycled and died, and Mrs. Plastic Bag, she was very upset, and because she never got like hugs and kisses anymore, she developed really bad mouth ulcers. And so Plastic Bag has now become like an understanding for me, like to mean you know, stomach. And now that the stomach is secreting more acid, I guess. Like it kind of like the stomach is the bag, because I think about bag and stomach is the same. And now that Mr. Bag has died, Mrs. Bag is crying a lot. So maybe her crying a lot is the actual stomach acid. Really weird, right? And now that she's crying a lot, she's producing a lot of ulcers. And that's what psychosomatic medicine is. There you go. You want to make it weird. And you can do this for like the more crazy types of information and the ones that really don't make sense. And you can do this at a micro level. You can see that didn't really take too long to think about, right? Obviously, if there's like a more complex type of keyword, I would spend a little bit more time on it. But as I do this across the board and I kind of do it alongside the analogy, and I even mix this, and you can see this doesn't really relate to cars here per se, and that's fine. Like I can have this somewhere if I need to have it somewhere. Like the old part was psychosomatic medicine, and so I might talk about old cars, and I might talk about how they were, and I might talk about like, there was also once upon a time where there was like a Mr. and Mrs. Bag, they were in love, and Mr. Bag got recycled, and Mrs. Bag started crying a lot, and then she started to develop ulcers in her mouth. Weird, right? Let's move on. Final part is going to be mnemonics, and this is actually the perfect place to demonstrate it. So let's say, for example, you need to memorize a list like this. So it's actually not uncommon for us to have to memorize like, what are the worldwide causes of death? And there's like 2030 here. And you can see there's a projected ranks. And so like a question that you might get, or something that you might want to remember for yourself is, well, what are the ways that disease or injury, what are the projected ranks of disease and injury and cause of disease or injury by 2030? And this is where we're going to use mnemonics, where we try inventing like a word that makes it a bit easier to remember. So if I just take a look at this here, let me just get that onto the iPad. So just copy that here and paste that here. There we go. Nice. There we go. Let me just put the focus mode on. Here we go. So what I'm going to try doing is what I would do initially is I'd actually do this process here, the importance ranking, the relational mapping, and the micro teaching of this process here. Try thinking about ways to connect it, but I might need to memorize this. And so this is where I can use mnemonics. And you can see that the way that I would do mnemonics is I'd take a look at what's happening here. So the first word is I, and so if I just take a look here, let's try memorizing the first 5, then the last 5. So there's I-S, iscal, and there's also ditkisser. Right? Can you see that? So there you go. You can see how that. Those are 2 things there, but I see that to be heart disease as one of the first ones. So, ischemic heart disease, I don't know how important it is for me to remember that. So heart disease is like HD, stroke is that, pulmonary disease, is like PD, and then there's Alzheimer's, which is like A, and there's also like respiratory functions, which is R. So I can also do that. So instead of doing iscal, which is a bit weird, I might do SPAR, HSPAR. Which one's easier for me to remember? Maybe HSPAR, right? HSPAR is the first, and then we've got DLKL, right? And then this is actually how you would do that. And so if you would need to memorize something, you've got HSPAR, and then you've got DLKLR, right? Or DLKCR, depends on what you want to do, right? And you would then actually repeat this constantly, and you would try thinking about a way to do it. So if someone were to say, okay, so let me try repeating that, and I'm actually have to do this, HSPAR or HISPAR, his par, and then there's also DLKCR. So his par, and then DILK CR. His par, DILK CR. And so if I try remembering it, this would be a bit hard. So HS par and DILK C par or CR. So the first one was heart by 2030. The second one I forgot already. The third one was pulmonary disease.
The fourth one was the first one was heart. The second one I've already kind of forgotten, which is okay because this is the part of the process. I only care about remembering that. Pulmonary disease and stroke. I remember it. Yes, stroke. And then the fourth one here, I don't remember it. I'll get back to it. This one was road incidents. I remember that. This one was cirrhosis of the liver. I remember that. I think this A one was Alzheimer's. And then the liver, yep. And then there was something here. There was K, there was L, there was... I don't really remember. That's okay. I'll try thinking about it a little bit more. So ischemic heart disease, and then stroke, and then pulmonary disease, and Alzheimer's. I think R was respiratory. No, that was L. That's why I did lungs. I think so. Like respiratory related stuff. And then K was... Oh, I think he was like diabetes. I think I remember seeing that. And then K was... I don't remember. And then the H spar, DLKCR. That's okay. So you can see I've tried remembering as much as I can, but then I just go back and I just take a look. So the ones that I didn't get was respiratory. Lower respiratory infections. Yeah, that's a bit hard for me to remember. Lower respiratory infections. I actually don't know what that is as well. So I'm just going to circle that one here. Lower respiratory functions, I got wrong. And then, I didn't get at all. So let's just mark it. So I got the heart one correct. I got stroke correct. I got pulmonary disease correct. I got Alzheimer's correct. I didn't get this one. And then diabetes, I got correct. Lungs, I got correct. Kidney diseases, I didn't get. So kidney, I didn't get correct. Liver, I got correct, and road injury, I got correct. And so there was two parts that I didn't get correct. And what I would try doing is I try making the acronym like a little bit more memorable, because HSPAR is not really that memorable. Yeah, it's like weird. I don't really remember it that much. HSPAR, DLKCR. But then this is the part where I would do like rote memorization, right? So what is lower respiratory infections? If there's another word that I can have for this, that would be nice. Lower respiratory infections. Pneumonia. I see. So lower, like, is this upper then? Like, is the other one upper? Trachea, bronch. Yeah. So this tends to be upper, and then that's lower. Okay. Well, then I might just change that to L, maybe, and then maybe there's like UL, LL. HSPAL, DLCR. So if I have to remember it. Okay, let's try again. HSPAR. No, it's HSPAL, and then D. It was this before. DLKCR, and now it's DLU. So it's DUKCR. Okay, and then we had... Let's try go for it. The first one was heart. That's how you spell heart. Second one was stroke. Third one was pulmonary disease. Fourth one was Alzheimer's. Fifth one, this is what I just did, so it's lower respiratory infections. And then this one was diabetes. This one was kidney. This one was liver. And then this one was road injury. And then this one was like maybe upper respiratory. I actually don't know if that's a correct way of thinking about it, but that's a bit easier. So trachea and bronchus would be here. Yeah. So that's the way that I would apply the way of doing, what's it called? The mnemonics. Now, like, what's a better way of doing this? Like, a nicer way of doing this is rearranging those words so it's like a bit nicer to know. But the reason I need to do this in this order is because like of this. But if I had the ability to just rearrange it, if it's just like factors that I need to remember, that's a lot easier because I can just like do, for example, I could just actually make a word that makes sense. So here, this is nice. I could just do sharp. SHARP. Sharp works there. And then I might do like, and for this one, if I could rearrange the order, which I can't because it is like on a scale of 1 to 10, I would do like CR, Cristiano Ronaldo, and then DLK, nope, KLD, nope. Yeah, maybe Cristiano like killed, like Messi or something, right? Maybe that makes a bit more sense. Messi's not part of this, and so I might just do Messi, but then I just remember, yes. So it's like sharp. Cristiano Ronaldo killed Messi. I don't know, right? So that's like this process of using acronyms to actually make things a little bit more memorable, and I might apply that in certain parts of the map if I need to like do it. But you can see for these parts here, for this and this part here, especially for the analogies, like it is a combination of all. You'll try using an analogy, so I just use like a car analogy, and then for abstract visuals, you could use something that's not related to cars. That's okay. So I use plastic bags who were married, and then one of them got recycled, and then they started crying, and then they developed mouth ulcers, and then I did HSPAR, DLKCR. If I need to remember the order, I need to keep that, and that means I just need to like repeat that a lot more. But and I might even put this onto a flashcard here, just to get that repetition in. And then I might also include it in my micro teaching as well as I'm doing that. You can do that. You can definitely do that. And if I was in a position to control it, I would then do sharp. Cristiano Ronaldo killed Messi, right? And then it's like cool. That kind of makes sense. So these are the three techniques you can use to try increasing and making the things a little easier to remember by making them absurd and personally more relevant.
Stop chasing, never forget again. That's just a losing game against your own biology. Instead, try these 6 techniques. Rank what matters, connect your ideas, teach them back, build analogies, make absurd visuals, and use mnemonics for the arbitrary bits. And if you apply these 6 techniques, you will go from forgetting a lot of information to forgetting less information. And over time, you can really close in that gap a lot more to a point where you aren't forgetting as much information. You will forget a little bit of information, but that's okay because then you can just fill it in through the retrieval practice and the repeated exposure that you need to do for these topics anyway, because that's how you build mastery. There's no one in this world who just sat for one study session and then just studied and then remembered everything and then carried on. That doesn't exist. Mastery is built from doing repeated practice over time, but you can definitely make a dent in how efficiently you're encoding the information the first time around. And this is what these 6 techniques aim to offer. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Were any of the techniques helpful? Have you tried them in the past? How do you find the demonstrations? I'm responding to each comment.